So, who are you and what do you do?
Uh, my name is John Mackey. I'm probably best known for being the co-founder of Whole Foods Market and a longtime CEO there for 44 years until I retired from Whole Foods about 2 years ago. Also the author of and co-author of 5 books, including my most recent book, which is The Whole Story: Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism.
So, it's always interesting to speak to someone who does a bunch of books and then decides it's memoir, tell all time. Was it the fact that you stepped away from being the CEO and permanent role that made you feel now is the time? Why now for the memoir?
It's a good question, Mitch. I think that first it was a gift to the team members of Whole Foods. Over the history of Whole Foods, there are about 120,000 people currently working for the company, and over 1 million have worked for it throughout our history. So it was kind of like a gift to past, present, and future team members, because particularly the people that come in, they're working there today or will be coming in later. They only know it as a big corporation. They don't know it. Most of our history weren't that big. I mean, for most of our history, we're a relatively small company. And so I think for them to know that story is important. Secondly, it was my final gift to Whole Foods. It brings closure for me personally. I would recommend everybody write a memoir, actually, because looking back on your life, the threads that are there, you see them come together. You see the only retrospectively do certain things in your life make sense. And that was really true for me as I relived almost 50 years of my life. I saw things from a different perspective, and that's proved to be very valuable. So I think those are the main reasons.
I love these conversations, in particular with people like you. I do another podcast where I interview bass players, big music guy. And I always love having conversations with bass players who've been with the artist forever. A great example of that was I spoke to Graham Maybe, who was the bass player for Joe Jackson since the 70s. A name you
Wow.
probably never heard. I never heard. You think about their music and it's so attached to the bass, that instrument, and
Sure.
just being on that trajectory. It's amazing to speak to a CEO executive like you because it's not like you came into the business of Whole Food markets and took it. It was something you started and literally spent your life at.
Yes.
The reflections must be so different for someone like you when it's all you know.
Uh, well, it's not all that I know, but
In terms of one, most CEOs have tenures.
yes. I mean, my resume is a very bizarre looking resume. It's got like uh, busboy, dishwasher, boys camp counselor, assistant manager, Good Foods, and CEO Whole Foods Market. So I had many jobs.
Yeah. And when you think about those early days, is it unbelievable to just think of the scale of it today? Or is it one of those things where you knew it? I think about my entrepreneurship journey. A lot of people I meet, it's they want to be self-employed. They want to basically earn enough and run their own business where they
Mhm.
can take care of themselves, their family. Others, I think I had a bit of that. I figured if I'm going to do this, I want it to be as big and as bold as possible. There's a mindset there that's very different from person to person.
I think in my case, uh, of course, I was when we started working on the first store. I was 24, and Renee, my girlfriend, co-founder, was 20. And I had no business background. I studied philosophy, religion, the humanities. I never took any business classes. I just was wholly unqualified to do the business. Um, and so was Renee. So we didn't know what we were doing. I didn't have any grand ambitions about creating a big business when we first started out. It was really just the first store was about selling healthy food to people and earning a living and having some fun. But as I learned more, I wanted to grow, and as we grew, that was fun. I wanted to grow more, and so the I mean, if you think about it, the first when we did our IPO in 1992, we'd been in existence 14 years. We had 12 stores after 14 years. Now the company has like 550 stores. So that all came mostly later as we went. But so I got used to the idea, Mitch. I didn't have this. if you told me when I was 24 years old that we were going to create a $22 billion a year company and have all these team members, and I said, well, it's impossible. I can't possibly do that. I don't know anything. But I learned and I grew and I read and I studied. I made lots of mistakes, and I learned from those mistakes. So it you look back at retrospectively, and again, that's one of the threads that you see looking back was my ambitions weren't there at the beginning. They came after a few years and a little bit of success. And then I never really thought, I mean, when we did our initial public offering, for example, in 1992, when we had those 12 stores, I was frequently asked, how big can this company go? Wall
I
Street wants to
remember.
know, how big can you be?
Right.
So I thought, well, maybe we could be 10 times bigger than we are. So I said, I think we could be 100 stores someday, which did not impress anybody on Wall Street, but it impressed me. I thought that would completely saturate the market. But the thing is the market grew. As we grew, the market grew. So we kind of caught a wave that was a big wave and had a long ride on it, if you're using a surfing metaphor. The only difference is we helped build the wave too. We didn't just
Right.
catch it.
So can you talk a little bit about that? It's always fascinating to me that sometimes you have a business that's reacting to a market. So the marketplace is changing. People want to eat healthier. They're thinking more about what's on the label, what it means. Then you have other instances where the business is building the marketplace. A great example would be the people who acquired you at Amazon. This was people who really, I was there at those early stages. People buying a book online, putting their credit card on the internet. These are the market changed with their growth.
Right.
How do you think about that in terms of in particular, the industry you were serving? Because it's such a unique space.
I do think Whole Foods changed the food universe and also changed the supermarket industry. And you'd have to know what supermarkets were like 40 or 50 years ago to appreciate what I've just said. They were terrible. They were not. They were kind of dirty. We didn't have the kind of transportation system that we have today. Uh, and most agriculture back 50 years ago was local. I remember when I was a little boy, and you could get orange juice from Florida, and Anita Bryant, Miss America, was singing it in the commercials. You could get orange juice from Florida, and all year round. It was like, wow. We didn't have that kind of connectivity in terms of food, so it was mostly local food economy. Um, that completely changed. And Whole Foods, because we put an emphasis on quality and natural and organic and freshness, we began to put produce and meat and seafood out there that really the world hadn't seen before. The United States hadn't seen before. And there were certainly some areas in Europe where you could get that fresh produce. And we had a bountiful amount. So we developed relationships, eventually starting in California, but eventually all around the world. And so that we do business in hundreds of countries. And so we helped change it. And the supermarket industry changed as a result of our success. That's the great thing about capitalism, is that good ideas get copied and improved upon. And you have sort of an upward spiral of progress as a result. Well, there are always unintended consequences to that, but in general, the trajectory is continued improvement.
The other aspect, though, is at the time, the more natural health-based stores similarly had their own struggles. They were small, limited inventory. People saw it as not having a great taste to it. It wasn't as exciting as the sugar and chaos and preservatives of others. It was expensive for people.
Yeah.
This was another. So there's other factors of the industry that in some magical way, Whole Foods is really bringing together to create a Walmart almost like experience accessible to all.
Yeah, well, of course, it wasn't magic. It was a lot of hard work over many, many years, and getting intellectual capital, getting scale. You can't, scale helps you get lower prices. So it didn't happen. If you look back on that very first Whole Foods Market store, we didn't have that much because the industry hadn't woken up yet. And part of it was a generational thing, Mitch. Back in America, back in the late 70s, early 80s, the only people shopping in our stores when we started out were counterculture people, were hippies.
Yeah, hippies. Yeah, beatniks.
That's right. And that made it very difficult for us to raise money because the people that had the money were older and they just could not relate at all to the people shopping in our stores or the food that we were selling. This whole idea of a natural food store to them seems like, well, that's not what people want. People want processed foods. And, and my mother, for example, I mean, for her, when she could get a Swanson's frozen dinner and pop it in the oven, no microwaves back then, dinner was taken care of for the kids. Or
Yeah.
open up a can of macaroni and cheese.
Yeah, craft dinner, whatever.
Yeah, and exactly. Wow, this is fantastic. And so that was the great trend line. And then a certain percentage of my generation, the baby boomers, sort of revolted against that and said, we want to get back to nature. We want to get back to the natural stuff. And that started out as pretty small, but over time it just grew and grew and grew. And, I mean, there's the old saying, the old cliche that we make progress one funeral at a time, because as the older generation dies off and the younger generations embraced a new ethos, then that becomes the new reality. So it all happened sort of not in a magic. It just happened gradually through hard work, learning, growing, evolving.
You're an interesting person also in terms of how you think about education, self-education, and the work that you're doing. There's something culturally really interesting about this story. And I kept pulling at that thread when I was reading the whole story. This idea of, like you said, these hippies and beatniks. You already mentioned the word capitalism, that you would think those two shall never cross. And yet it seemed like when the product was right and the fit was right, there was no real pushback that, well, wait a second, like we shouldn't be pushing. Suddenly there's $1 billion company with all these employees. And it seems like there's something culturally interesting there, because intuitively you would think divisive, that this idea of capitalism and these people wanting organic, natural are not the same people.
Well, that's partly true. What you said is partly true. I mean, I came out of the cooperative movement. I belonged to 3 food co-ops before I started up Safer Way and then Whole Foods Market. I lived in a vegetarian commune. I believed in food for people, not for profit. I believed in cooperation. I had lots of skepticism about capitalism. I was indoctrinated, as most of my generation was, by very socialistic professors in academia. It wasn't until I started a business that I kind of woke up to, well, gosh, I mean, the co-ops, they're not very successful. They had a problem they had guilt about making any money. And the people that own a consumer co-op, being the customers, would rather have low prices than retain any money for capital to expand or to buy new equipment or anything else. Just give us the lowest prices possible. That's why we're members of the co-op. So, and you also had the social justice warriors. You had the sort of 60s, 70s energy, and it was not pro-capitalism. It was very anti-capitalism. I went against that because I guess I started out that way, and it didn't work that well. I really thought I could do a better business than any co-op I'd ever seen. And that proved to be the case. And they were so much more interested in who they were going to boycott, or, they are feeling bad about making money, or they were just all the arguments that went on about politics. It was like, I just want to sell healthy food to people.
Yeah.
So I was less conflicted, you might say. And then my own philosophy changed as I got into business. I started to think, well, this was back in Austin in 1978. This is when Star Wars is just coming on. And I remember the Empire Strikes came back, and I got branded Darth Vader in Austin for a while by some of my co-op friends, that I had gone over to the dark side.
Right.
I'd become a capitalist. So, but quite frankly, I discovered business. If you really want to change the world, business is one of the most effective ways to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange now, conscious capitalism being something you talk a lot about. You wrote the book on it back in 2015. It's almost surprising that it took that long, to me at least, commercially, for this to become more ingrained in everyday life. Now it seems like it's part of who we are as people. We're going to do good, eat well, try to move away from this as a baseline. It's a low bar almost. But when you were doing it, it was so counterculture. That's what I find so interesting.
Well, in some ways it hits the mainstream, but let me give you some statistics that would maybe make the case that it's not as mainstream as you think.
Right.
I won't speak for Canada or Montreal, but in the United States, 74% of Americans over the age of 20 are overweight, and almost 40% are obese. I mean, so processed foods, fast food places, most Americans still do not eat very healthy. Most Americans
Right.
eat junk food. Although polls say if you poll people, about 90% think they eat a better diet than the average person eats.
Right.
But in general, people do not eat very healthily. And so although it's become more accepted and people are more conscious of it, in general, food addictions are quite deep.
Yeah.
Most people have a lot of trouble changing that. We crave fat, we crave sugar, we
Sugar.
crave salt, and we want to eat foods that give us a big load of all of those. And it's kind of like our biology. Our genetics are working against us now, Mitch, because we evolved over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years where calories were scarce. And so we crave calories. Give me the calories. But you couldn't get them for most of our evolutionary history. But now you can get them every single day, all day long, 3 meals a day, snacking. You can get massive quantities of calories. And so unless you become conscious and make different choices, eventually if you just follow your taste buds, you're going to end up not healthy and probably obese.
I mean, look, we're in Ozempic Nation now. I mean, this is the reality of where we
Exactly.
are.
We're taking drugs in order to try to lose weight, and because people, they don't want to change their diets, so they want a drug that'll do it for them. And the long-term I'm not going to speak about that drug
Yeah.
particularly, but I've studied, if you look at the history of weight loss drugs going back into the 50s when we had amphetamines, they were the first
Right.
weight loss. The pharmaceutical companies come out with these new drugs to help people lose weight. And then the dark side, the shadow side comes up later when it's like, oh, yeah, that's linked to cancer of the liver or the pancreas or your average life. You may be losing weight, but your average lifespan is declining. I mean, I just predict that this is not going to be an exception, that we'll have a good 10-year run and may make a lot of money in those 10 years, and then it'll probably be banned.
Yeah, I don't know if you read Magic Pill by Johan Hari, but he was on the show as
No.
well. And the argument he makes for it, and he's quite a journalist and not, he's not a pawn of the pharma, of big pharma at all. It's very interesting how the balance of, like, obviously it's a personal choice and the risks are there. But this idea that the idea of a forever drug seems to be okay with people, which is an interesting new philosophy. I find that I'm going to be on this forever as if you would be for a stent or something like that. That's interesting. The idea that it's putting out a fire instead of trying to deal with the fact of how do we deal with fires and the fire marshals and our infrastructure. If we do this now, it's going to down the road prevent things like knee replacements, hip replacements, high blood pressure, diabetes. It's interesting the moves we're willing to make for these things. I find that area really fascinating to me.
Of course, my new business I'm co-founded, Love Life, which I
Yeah,
talk
we're
about
going
in
to
the
talk about
book,
that. Yeah.
is completely opposite approach, which
Right.
is, I mean, losing weight may deal with some of the problems from a bad diet, but it doesn't solve heart disease, which is our leading killer. It doesn't lessen your risk for cancers, which is our second leading killer. It doesn't lower your risk for, it actually may lower your risk slightly for type 2 diabetes. So that might be a plus.
Right.
But the main killers are still there. And I would argue that diet and lifestyle contribute radically to heart disease and to cancer. And so you're dealing with one problem, but you're not really, the problem with the medical system is it just deals with symptoms
It's a
instead of
Band-Aid. It's the
actually.
Band-Aid versus the cure.
Yes, exactly. And it's very, very, very profitable. That's the part of it that's not getting too much mentioned probably in that book. It's very profitable for pharmaceutical companies, but it's not a lasting solution for the world or America. The lasting solution is we have to evolve the way we eat and the way we live if we want to have high, abundant, long life with high vitality. And I'm not saying it's easy to change your food addictions. It's not easy, but that at the end of the day is the best long-term solution for you and for the planet, in my opinion.
you've done it, John. How do you explain it to people who are struggling? What do you think it is? Do you think some people just have addictive natures? Do you think some people
We're
it's a
all
willpower thing?
no, I don't. I think we are. I think people are addicted to their food, and that's the first step is to overcoming any addiction is to recognize that you have it. And most people are in denial that they have food addictions. Actually, only time you really know if you have an addiction is if you try to change, and then you realize it's not so easy. I
Right.
mean, I know all kinds of smokers that tell me they can quit anytime they want to, but they just don't want to. And but if they try, they find it's difficult to let it go. I think food is maybe even more difficult because we have so much emotional stuff wound up to comfort foods and foods we had when we were kids, et cetera, et cetera. But what I will tell you, Mitch, is that um, the great thing is that why I have hope is our taste buds turn over about every 2 weeks. Did you know that? We get new cells and the taste buds are completely replaced about every 2 weeks. And I have found that you can learn to like any food if you will just expose yourself to it about 10 times. So I've taught myself, when I was a kid, I didn't eat any vegetables at all, zero, nothing, unless you count pickle on a hamburger as a
Right.
vegetable.
French
But
fries as
but
potato, right? Yeah.
now I like every kind of vegetable, and it's because I started exposing myself to it, and you go from this stage of I can't stand that to you know what it's I don't like it, but I can eat it. To it's really not that bad. To I love that stuff. I can't wait to get some more broccoli. It's delicious. So, what have you ever noticed? Like people from Italy, they just really like to eat Italian food, and
Right.
people from Thailand, they really want to eat Thai food, or people from India really want to eat Indian food. People want to eat whatever they've gotten used to. So, if we teach ourselves to like the foods that nourish our bodies the most, we will come to like them. I have no loss of pleasure in my life for eating. I would argue I have a higher degree of pleasure than most people in eating. I just have learned and taught myself to like foods that are really good for me and nourishing for me. And if I can do it, others can do it as well. If they're aware, A, they're addicted, and B, there's no loss of pleasure in that, not even the long run. In the intermediate run, there's no loss in pleasure. Within a few months, you will be enjoying your food more than you enjoyed the junk food that you gave up.
Curious your thoughts on nostalgia, because that's an interesting connection between the food that we eat, which is we think about it as being comfort food,
Oh, yeah.
things that we know. Also, I think about the brand of Whole Food Market. Being Canadian and walking in the store for the first time, I felt this overwhelming sense of nostalgia in a strange way. Uh, there's a brand feeling. Do you think about nostalgia as a strategy? Do you think about it as in terms of even your life?
Uh, I never thought about it as a business strategy, but it can be a good business strategy. That wasn't, I mean, Whole Foods wasn't about nostalgia. It was about, it was always new. We were trying to change the world. So we were thinking about it more in that way, transformation. I'm personally, I'm an entrepreneur. So while I have a sentimental, nostalgic side to me, as my wife would be sure to tell you if she was in this conversation, in general, I'm always thinking about the future, uh, what I'm going to do next, as opposed to what I've already done. They once asked Picasso, for example, about which was his favorite painting, and
The
he said
next
the
one,
one I'm
yeah.
working on right now.
Yeah, the next one, yeah.
And I think that's true for people that write books or any kind of creative person that writes music, whatever. It's what you're creating now that captures your attention and your interest. And I occasionally look back nostalgically. Doing this book uh, was a very nostalgic
Yeah.
journey for me. The thing that was weird about it is when you look back on the whole 45 years of the journey, I suppose, for me in natural foods, I mean, it doesn't seem like it was yesterday or last week, but it just seems like it was a few years ago. It doesn't seem
Yeah.
like it was that far long ago. It's amazing how fast time goes, and when you're young, you're not conscious of it because you can see your whole life stretching out in front of you. But when you get to be older, you look at it and you say, "My God, where did it all go? It's been fun, but it just went by so quickly."
Yeah. Talk a bit about that energy and that entrepreneurship something that I definitely struggle with. I had an exit to a large public company 10 years ago. And as my new ventures came on, my line today is I'll jokingly say, I wish I had Mitch Joel 2004, not Mitch Joel 2024. Things happen. We get comfortable. There's more money. There's more access, more things we can do that are interesting. I get to speak a lot. I get to write. I get to speak to great leaders like you. And yet, like you said, you spent 44 years there. We didn't even talk about Amazon, being a public company, then going to Amazon, it's not the same as just running a business the way we traditionally do. Now Love Life, another venture. What is that energy for you? Do you know? Can you sprinkle some magic my way?
Well, first of all, you make a very, very good point. And I'm not 24 years any longer. So I have a lot more. Here's what's different about entrepreneur John at age 70 versus entrepreneur John at age 24. First of all, I know a lot more. Secondly, I have a lot more money. Third, I have a lot more relationships that I can draw upon and call upon. Fourth, I don't have the same drive that I had when I was 24. That's the big difference. I'm not willing to work 70, 80-hour weeks, week after week after week after week. I'm just not willing to do that because I'm more, the reality in any way you want to look at it is I have fewer years ahead than I have behind. So there are other things in life that I want to enjoy. So the secret there is to give my wisdom, give my money, give my sort of leadership and my vision to the business, but have a lot of young people that are out in the world making their mark, that want to show what they can do, and they can make more money to make sure they're on the team and that they're driving the business forward. So that's my advice to you is if you can, and it's yet to see whether or not I'm going to have to go say, I'm riding into town and I've taken over because you guys aren't doing it right. I hope I don't have to do that, but I guess I'm prepared to do that if I must. So
back into the foxhole, right?
Pretty much. I mean, I've got a lot of capital on the line, so I'm not going to. I'm really hoping it doesn't come down to that, but if it's necessary, I'll do what's necessary.
Tell me a bit about just business as the world is. One of the startling pieces of data that I actually brought to audiences very recently is I was thinking about NVIDIA and looking at the news, and you have this founder, the CEO, who took in, I don't know what the delta was, but we're talking about a significant amount of billions between January and now, just based off of how the stock is performing. Kudos to the company, their performance. But it's a staggering number when we look at it. There's CEO pay we talked about. We talked offline a little bit about unions and how unions work. We're talking about people struggling in this world. The price of everything has gone crazy. Can you circle some of those squares of what your philosophy is, how you think about it, how you speak to other leaders about just the current state of this world? It seems like the people at the top are really raking it in and the middle class is eroding and people are really concerned about our world.
Yeah, well, I really disagree with that. Almost every point, if I was to take a point-by-point rebuttal, I'd give you a different argument. So I'll first ask the question. I'll give you the entire history of the human race. Tell me when it's been a better time to be alive than right now. Not that there's not a lot of problems, but when did humanity not have a lot of problems? I mean, if you go back, the most interesting thing is if you just go back 200 years ago, which is nothing in the scheme of the human adventure, 200 years ago, 94% of everyone alive on this planet lived on less than $2 a day. 85% lived on less than $1 a day. The average lifespan was 30. The illiteracy rate was 88%, meaning 88% of the people alive couldn't read. The patriarchy was everywhere. Women were not empowered anywhere in the world. Racism, if you think it's a problem today,
blood
it's
wars.
Nothing compared to how it was
Slavery.
200 years ago. Yes, I mean, things are so much better than they've ever been before. And in my lifetime, and now of 70 years, I look back when I was a little boy growing up in Houston, Texas, and the Jim Crow laws were still in effect, right? You had colored bathrooms, colored water fountains, and you didn't have any school integration. women were not empowered. They were just secretaries, and they got to teach elementary school maybe, and they were just homemakers, and they weren't. I mean, it was not great. And is it perfect today? It's not. But based on you have to you have to acknowledge how much progress we've made, and that pretty much goes. And we say that the rich are getting richer, and no, it's really not. I mean, the, if you look back on even the richest people in today, I mean, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, people like that, they're quite wealthy by all historical standards, but they're not nearly as wealthy, relatively speaking, to somebody like John D. Rockefeller was, or Andrew Carnegie was, or Andrew Mellon was. I mean, these guys had such a they had a percentage of the total GDP of the country. So, I mean, every one of the problems, you just need to put it in context. Does that mean we don't have to make continued progress? Of course we do. We have racism still there. We have to continue to struggle against it. Um, there's still evidence of some patriarchy existing, and particularly less so in developed countries like the United States and Canada, but certainly true in Africa and lots of Latin America. I mean, so humanity, we're continuing to make progress. But you know what? The world is a lot better than when I came into it. That's just I can prove that to anybody that's got an open, rational mind.
Yeah.
And I believe if the answer to my trick question is when would you rather be alive? I'd rather be alive 100 years from now than I am than today, because I think it's going to be a lot better 100 years from now than it is today. Just
Yeah.
like it was a lot better today than 100 years ago. So I guess I'm a great believer in continued evolution of humanity in positive directions.
Yeah, I am too. You're saying a lot of things that one of my favorite thinkers, Steven Pinker, talks a lot about.
He's my hero.
Oh, mine too. Yeah, he's actually somebody I know. He grew up here in Montreal. Our mothers were good friends. So yeah, I'm even a bigger
I'm
fan.
going to meet Stephen. I'm having dinner with him in about 3 weeks
I'll
in
tell him I send my
Las
regards.
Vegas. I will
Yeah,
actually. Okay.
he's great. Yeah, he's great. And it's so interesting, by the way, that his work is currently being critiqued, and there was even an attempt to cancel him very recently too. That it's amazing why we're like this as a society.
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, if people ask me what's one book you should read, I'm probably going to say the whole journey, the whole story. But the next I'm going to say is the most important book I think written so far in the 21st century is Enlightenment.
Yeah,
Now,
Steve Pinker's book. Yeah,
I think that book should be mandatory reading. Can it be critiqued? Yeah. Well, what can't be critiqued, for God's sake? Anything can be critiqued. But he's got so much documentation in the book. It's sort of overwhelming. Any open-minded, rational person would come to believe actually we're making a lot of progress in almost every area. So, but also back to I wanted to just get the Steven Pinker kudos in. So, but what was I lost the thread of your question?
No, we were just talking about how it's interesting how even with that documentation and that thinking, it's like humanity needs to move in this way where we think this is the end of times. I mean, even like I'm living this now as somebody who is a big proponent for artificial intelligence and tech evolution. It's my area of expertise.
As am I.
Yeah.
AI is a complete game changer, and 99% of it will be super positive.
Yeah.
So remember how I was talking about with food that we evolved where in scarcity, and so our genetics, we crave calorie density, and we just if we can get it, we want it. Well, we evolved for almost all of our evolutionary history where if you were scared, you had a much higher chance of survival. If you weren't, the
Anxiety
saber-toothed
was
tigers,
the superpower. Yeah.
yeah, super. I mean, if you didn't have healthy fear, then you could get knocked out,
Yeah.
right? So I think today, unfortunately, now with the connected media world that we live in, with social media and instant news about everything around the world at all times, it's just a continued, just a drumbeat of disaster thinking, and because people, that's what sells. If it bleeds, it leads,
Right.
and so people are so. I mean, the most neurotic people I know are the people that spend a lot of time watching the news. And they just find new things to worry about, and the anxiety levels are super high. So that's a negative compared to 50 years ago or 100 years ago, where most of the news was local. You couldn't even get worldwide news, and people they weren't nearly as neurotic or as anxious as they are today. But here's the thing: I don't listen to the news. I only stay up on, obviously if terrible things happen, I become aware of them, but I don't obsess on it. I don't spend a lot of time. It's kind of been my philosophy, Mitch. I don't worry about things I can't do anything about. I'm not going to worry about an AI apocalypse. I can't do anything about it. And and I think it's a waste of time to spend a lot of time worrying about things you cannot control or affect. It's better to put your creative mind thinking about it. There are serious problems in our world, and some of them like my new business, can help people to be healthier. I'm going to focus my life energy in constructive ways that help people. I'm not going to spend it worrying about things that are completely out of my power and my control.
I love these conversations too, because they always illuminate for me where we spend our time, which is either the people you network with or even the content you surround yourself with. I think about it too in terms of just digital. We just talked about people like Steven Pinker. Even this conversation, you couldn't have this 20 years ago, where anybody could have a conversation with a leading business person like yourself. It usually be a 5-minute segment on the news
Right.
and passing as you go. But now we can spend 4 hours sometimes with Steven Pinker having a conversation with somebody. You can spend that time in a very different way and have access in a very different way. Like, even if it leads, it leads. It's true. For sure, it's true in the news cycle. But now I feel like there's so much content that can overpower that. So it's the energy and focus where we go.
It's taking control of taking responsibility for your own life.
Like the diet.
Yes, take responsibility in what you eat. Take responsibility about what you let into your consciousness.
Oh.
If you're going to let all the garbage in, then expect to have a garbage kind of consciousness and a garbage kind of life. We live in this world where we have more liberty and more freedom than probably any other time in history. But people can go decadent. They can make bad choices. And it's up to each of us to sort of wake up and take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah. I want to talk about a particular moment in the Whole Foods story, which would be 2017 and Amazon. Near $14 billion takeover. The company had been public since 1992, as you already said. I'm a digital person running a digital marketing agency at the time, being called nonstop about this news item. It was a news item that hit the wire, and people literally thought, what is going on here? And there was a lot of very smart people making some very large armchair quarterbacking comments about that moment in time. Things like, oh, they're buying the physical infrastructure to make the last mile come together. It's a brilliant real estate move. There was all these conversations. I'm curious your perspective on what that moment was like, why you're making the choice to go with a company like that, and what everybody either got right or wrong about this acquisition, because it was wild, all of the speculation.
Yeah. Well, of course, the question I get asked the most often, I'm going to answer that question, even though you didn't ask it, because it's kind of implied.
That's why you didn't ask it.
Do you regret selling to Amazon?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And the answer is, the honest, truthful answer is, I regret the circumstances that made that the best solution for the problem that Whole Foods was facing.
Okay.
They were the best solution. If I had to go back in time, given the same circumstances, I'd make the same decision. Because we were being hounded by shareholder activists. That I met with these guys, and they did not want to help Whole Foods get better. They said, look, we don't want to help you get better. We're going to take over your board, and once we do that, we're going to fire you and the rest of your management team. And then we're going to put this company up for sale to the highest bidder. And there's not a friggin' thing you can do about it. We're going to do it. And then stormed out of our conference room and left. So it was like, okay, we can't really work with these guys. Then it was like we could fight them. That was one possible solution, which is we did a lot of serious work in preparation to do that very thing. Secondly, we could find a friendly buyer, somebody like Warren Buffett, that would buy the company and let us continue to operate as Whole Foods. We actually approached him, and he made a joke about it. He said that he owned Dairy Queen, and he did not think it was a good brand fit for him.
Yeah, exactly. He's drinking his Pepsis and stopping at McDonald's every day.
Exactly. Or we could take it private. Uh, and that was one we gave some serious consideration to. But back in 2008, when we had the great financial crisis of our lifetimes, Whole Foods stock price dropped 90%, and we were selling at 3 times our cash flow. And if we had another contraction like that, when you go private, what you're mostly doing is taking a massive quantity of debt
Yeah.
onto your balance sheet. And if you can turn a company around and get the stock and you could take it public again, the private equity firm that acquired you, because you'll be acquired by a private equity firm, they can make billions of dollars.
Right.
But if something bad happens, then your company's going to fail. And at the end of the day, I said, this is just too big of a risk, because remember, that was only 9 years after we'd had the last financial crisis. So we decided not to go that route. Amazon became the best solution. I'd met Jeff a year before at this conference. He and I hit it off. I really liked him. He liked science fiction. He liked fantasy. I liked both of those things. He liked to scuba dive. I scuba dived all around the world. So we had good conversations. And he said, I'm really interested in Whole Foods. We need to get together and talk some more. And that didn't happen in the next year until we approached them about would they be interested in buying Whole Foods. And so the other thing I want to say is that I approach deals thinking in a win-win-win framework, good for you, good for us, good for all of us. And I was looking at it from the perspective, what's the best thing for all the stakeholders of Whole Foods? And here's something the media never picks up on. So there have been problems with the Amazon merger. It hasn't been perfect. It's like a marriage. It's not, you have struggles and difficulties. However, it was good for our customers because Whole Foods needed to drop its prices. That was going to be almost impossible to do with shareholder activists looking over our shoulders, because there's a lag period from dropping prices. Your sales fall, your same store sales fall, your profits fall in the short run. In the long run, you have a favorable loop as people say, oh, they're cheaper now, I'm going to shop there more often. Amazon dropped our prices 4 times, or let us drop our prices 4 times in the first 2 years, significantly. It cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. Secondly, they gave our team members one, because Amazon, within 30 days of the merger, they wanted to go to a $15 minimum wage. And that had the effect of raising the hourly pay of everyone in our company. And that also cost Amazon a couple $100 million to do that. And they were willing to pay it. So good for our team members. They also got new opportunities for growth. Some of them went to work for Amazon, so they had new opportunities for advancement. Good for our suppliers, because not only did we not have to cut any of our suppliers, but Amazon saw our sales with every single supplier we had, and they picked a lot of them up that they weren't doing business with before.
Of course.
Exactly. So our suppliers gained. Our investors got a 30% premium over what our stock had been before the activists and before Amazon came on the scene. And the government got hundreds of millions of dollars in additional tax revenues from all the capital gains taxes they collected. So it was a win for every one of our stakeholders. So that's generally what I want people to see, because they don't know that. And of course, as I go into in the book, there were conflicts.
Sure.
Everything wasn't perfect. But in general, it was the best solution for us at that particular time. So now back to the thread of your basic question.
It's interesting now. You're talking pure business calculus, and all the speculation almost avoided that. It's very interesting.
Well, what it tends to happen, the media overhypes things. So actually, Whole Foods has been a solution to some of Amazon. Almost all of our stores have return areas, and we're focused in major metro areas. So one of the problems for Amazon was, if somebody's unhappy with one of their purchases, how do they get it back to Amazon? Most people don't want to ship it back.
Right.
But they can now just go over to Whole Foods and drop it off. I mean, that's all they have to do. They get a print, they go online, so they want to do a return, and then they just drop it off at Whole Foods, and we take care of the rest of it for them. So that's been a really good thing. Also, they really wanted to get more into the grocery business, and so we gave them a great foundation for that. And now we're helping Amazon Fresh to, after I retired, the new guy they brought in from Tesco, Tony Hoggett. Tony's got Whole Foods and Amazon Fresh much more integrated. They were much more separate when I was still there, but now they've with me gone, there was no barriers to that. I think they just went in that direction. So they overhyped it. in the short run, they overhyped it. In the long run, pretty much all those predictions that people said are going to come true. That Amazon is going to be more of a force in the grocery business. They have personally solved for the last mile. They've made Whole Foods better in some ways, and we're more efficient than we used to be. We have good grocery delivery and grocery pickup that we didn't really have before. So, yeah, I mean, I think people were captured by the idea of this Amazon's buying this natural food grocery company. I mean, what's that all about? So it did. It was overhyped, and now now we're talking. Now it's what 6-7 years later, right?
Yeah.
And we're actually made a lot of progress going down the paths that people were predicting at that time, and I think that will continue.
What makes Amazon unique in this is there felt like there was a separation, that Whole Foods was still being run as Whole Foods. There was this commentary at the beginning of, you'll see in every aisle an Alexa device or a Kindle. Now, I did notice in some stores there were stands where you could pick these devices up, but not a massive overplay on that. You mentioned Amazon Fresh. You mentioned the fact that there's more alignment now that you're not there. Was part of what you were doing making sure that there was these separate brands, that even though it was owned by this
No,
company, that so talk a bit about what that looks like, because for
well,
some people, they might think, well, hold on a second. Doesn't it make sense that Whole Food becomes Amazon Fresh or vice versa?
it's so much more complex than that. First of all, Whole Foods has a great brand, and
Great
turning it
brand.
into Amazon Fresh would piss off all the Whole Foods Market customers. So that's a good way to destroy the business. If you wanted to commit suicide and ruin your acquisition, do that,
Right.
because then Whole Foods customers would desert in mass. Even then, a lot of Whole Foods customers were not happy about the deal. They were so
For
afraid
sure.
Amazon was going to change it. So the good news here is Amazon has not really tried to change Whole Foods culture. They were, from the very beginning, they were very respectful of our own purpose, our own mission. They haven't tried. We still have our quality standards. They didn't go mess with that. And I think that I just don't think people fully appreciate that. But the best way is, I have a metaphor that I've come up with actually on this book tour that I'll share with you, which
Please.
is Amazon is like Whole Foods. When Amazon acquired us, we were like the 250th largest corporation in America by sales. We were a Fortune 250 company, but Amazon was a Fortune 5 company. Amazon has this, it's like a giant sun that has this massive
Yeah.
gravitational pull. Whole Foods was a big planet. We're like Jupiter. But we're rotating around the sun, not the other way around, right? And so their culture is also a very powerful culture. So it had a gravitational pull on Whole Foods. There's no way to avoid that completely. Nor did we necessarily want to. We wanted to learn the very best we could from Amazon, to take the best ideas and make and we took a lot of great ideas from Amazon that made Whole Foods better. But we also did not want our planet to be blown up into the sun, right?
Back to Star Wars. Back to Star
Yes,
Wars. Yeah.
we're happy to orbit this powerful sun, but we didn't want to be engulfed by the sun and be disintegrated, right? So Whole Foods took a lot of steps to protect its culture, which continued even after I've retired. Whole Foods has a strong sense of now. What's different 7 years later is we understand Amazon a lot better. They understand Whole Foods a lot better. There's sort of mutual respect, and there's integration where it makes sense to integrate. And Whole Foods is so good in perishables. I'll give you an example. That one of our secrets is we just do produce, meat, and seafood better than almost any other supermarket operators do. And Amazon didn't want to lose that. But at the same time, with Amazon Fresh, and we have good distribution for it and good purchasing, they did not want Amazon Fresh wanted to compete with Walmart on price.
Right.
Well, you can't source Whole Foods quality and sell it at Walmart price. That's impossible to do. So one of the challenges was how do we get Whole Foods to source Walmart quality for Amazon Fresh to compete without compromising Whole Foods Market's own standards? That was a challenge, but one that we were sort of juggling to make possible.
Yeah.
And that's continuing to go on as a challenge probably for the business, I think. But it's not my problem any longer.
I was going to say, but there is interesting stories here that I think are just germane to business and how we think. And that's why I love these stories. I think also about the fact that you mentioned Walmart, Target entering the grocery business. This is big deal. It turned out to be a very big deal. I remember the days where people would poo-poo the idea of buying a grocery at Walmart. And now the truth is, because of their merchandising and cycle, the odds of you buying that box of cereal being fresher at Walmart than a local grocer, it can be quite the delta. You also had, we talked again offline a little bit about Trader Joe's. You have Erewhon. There is a shift to also a higher, more exclusive. Yeah. There's a shift at Trader Joe's. I would think it's essentially a white labeling or private label model that's so dynamic and interesting. These are all things that, again, as an entrepreneur, you can be interested and passionate about. These are external factors that then impact core business. Talk a bit about what's happening as an entrepreneur in a world where not only are you managing hostile investors in a public company, one that's part of Amazon and the Sun is present, but then all of these other massive dynamics that are shifting the industry. So interesting.
So let's be clear now. My focus has moved away from this the last 2 years.
Yeah, of course.
That's why
you're done.
I was kind of making a joke, but also saying my mantra is that's not my problem any longer.
Right.
So, I mean, I still have observations about it, but I'm no longer an insider at Whole Foods. I don't see what's going on. And one of my gifts to the current CEO is I don't meddle at all. I'm not there looking over his shoulder. He needs to evolve Whole Foods and ways that he thinks is best. And, undoubtedly I would disapprove of a lot of the things that he's doing because I wouldn't do them, right? That doesn't mean that I would be right and he would be wrong. But the gift to him is to let him have the freedom or to not be undermining him in any way.
Yeah.
So,
but while you were there, you were seeing macro factors of an industry changing. I'm trying to get into the entrepreneurial mindset of how you become an entrepreneur in those things, because you are at that point still a very large gorilla, an 800-pound gorilla in that industry.
I mean, I was quite aware of everything you're talking about. With Trader Joe's, we created our 365 private label to compete with Trader Joe's, and I think it does compete well with Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's that's their major business model, so they devote tremendous resources to innovation at the private label line. They've out innovated Whole Foods in the private label sector. So Trader Joe's we've learned a lot from them. We are better than we used to be, but probably not as good as Trader Joe's in the area that they have made their core business proposition. Somebody like Erewhon is fascinating to me because they're trying to outflank Whole Foods on the high end, which nobody had ever done before.
Very interesting.
And the question about Erewhon, can they do it? Can they do it outside of Los Angeles? Mm-hmm. Maybe New York. There's not that many markets where you can do what they're doing in LA. There's a few, but not as many. Their scope of their business model is it's really nice, and I think they have a very profitable business model. But it's not as big a market as it's not the best part of the market, and so it's a very profitable part of the market. That being said, I wanted to compete head on with Erewhon, and I was working to do that before I retired. We have a brand in the Rocky Mountains called Ideal Market.
Yeah.
And we opened up a store in Denver that was to compete with an Erewhon. We were testing it out. And but I think since I've left, that idea has been shelved. And so I'm a very competitive guy. I would not concede that market. I would go after it. But you'd have to do it under a different brand because Whole Foods brand does not stretch to we can't compete with Erewhon with the Whole Foods Market brand, in my opinion. So it required a different brand. And the team after I left did not want to create another brand. And that was kind of the end of it.
Yeah. Talk to me a bit about how John grows. I'm thinking about, we've mentioned a couple of authors. I was very smitten when I was getting ready for this conversation where you were talking about business as this infinite game, Simon Sinek, and there was a book before it about infinite and how you can drive in this sort of business that's not a win-finish type of scenario. So I've always been fascinated with that model. Mm-hmm. Seems like you're an avid reader. Is it books? Is it technology? How do you stay sharp in terms of really getting yourself ahead?
I think in my case, I have less attachment to being wrong than the average person does. As an entrepreneur, you're frequently wrong. You have interpretations of what you think is going to work in the world, and you think it will, but then it doesn't. And you can either, if you won't change course, you will fail. And so the I always think as an entrepreneur, you're kind of engaged with. Do I know if Love Life's going to be successful? We're going to open up a store in 2 weeks in El Segundo, California, and I've spent a massive amount of my personal money on, and I think it's going to be successful, but I don't know. And it might be successful in ways we hadn't anticipated, and a failure in ways that we thought would be successful.
Hmm.
So you're in this dialogue with the market, and you have to evolve and adapt, and you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to grow. Um, Heck, my very first store was Saferway, and it was a vegetarian store, and it was going to fail unless we changed the product mix to open it up to a bigger market segment by selling animal foods. And that was difficult for me to do, but at the end of the day, I've tried to keep my own a distinction between my own personal eating and what other people eat. So it's been, but I'm also a very avid reader. I love ideas, and I'll take ideas from wherever I can get to them.
Yeah.
I also think your competitors are great teachers if you will listen to them. One of the rules I used to make is we go and look at somebody's store, and the human reaction is to come back and think we're doing better than them in every way. And so I said, okay, that's not acceptable. You tell me you have to come back with at least three things that they're doing that we should be doing, and that they're doing better than us. And don't come out until you can come up with those three things. Because you need to think about how you can improve, and you have to be willing to take that wherever you can get it, right? Whether it be from books, from people just, criticizing you, uh, and your competitors are, in a sense, can be your best teachers. I've always thought that the thing that's underrated about capitalism is that competition forces continued improvement. You can never sit on your status quo, because your competitors are studying you, and they're going to take your best ideas and duplicate them, and then take credit that they were their ideas all along.
Sure.
And so it's this continued learning. If you're not willing to continue to learn, then get out of the infinite game, because that's what it is. It's continued evolution forever.
But it's one thing that you applied it to business. But what I've noticed about reading the book and following your career is you apply this to spirituality. You apply this to your political views. We live in such contentious time. People double down on their ideas. It's amazing that you have that flexibility for even both philosophy, spirituality, religion, your own personal politics. That's a very unique type of person. I think we're similar in that sense. But I know that a lot of times when I'm having conversations with peers, it's somewhat anachromatic to what they're feeling or how the world is.
It's about what you identify with. And the reason people can't, or it's more difficult for people to be flexible and change, is they've got their self-identity wedded to their beliefs, their ideas, their politics, the food they eat, the way they look, their religious beliefs. As long as if you think that's what you are, then you're trapped in a self-identity that won't let you change, because you're fearful. I don't think I've got that many attachments, so to speak, in terms of my identity. It's like I always try to tell people, it's kind of like, beliefs are like clothes that I'm wearing. I've got this shirt on today. I'm not my shirt. At the end of the day, I'm going to go hang up my shirt in a closet. I wore it for today, and maybe I'll wear it again. Probably will, maybe next week. But it's not me. I'm not my clothes. I'm not my beliefs, whether they be religious beliefs or political beliefs, because those are change, and I want them to change, because I want to keep learning, and
Right.
I want it to evolve. Uh, and I think maybe business helped me see this, because as you say, it's business. I have to change, or if you fail in business, if you're not evolving and changing and growing. But I think it's the same way in life. in relationships, in politics, in religion. We should constantly be growing. We should constantly be letting our beliefs be challenged. I'm not my beliefs. You attack my beliefs, I'm not going to fight you. It's going to be like, that's interesting. Can you support that with logic and rationality? And if you can, I will change my mind. Because
Yeah.
why not? If the facts change, I change my mind. Just give me the facts. That's one thing as I love about Steven Pinker, by the way,
Yeah.
is he's a very rational guy.
It leads us perfectly to my last question, which is tell me the one thing that made you think differently. It's like the whole life has been this, John.
I don't know if there's been one thing.
It's a major one, yeah.
I talked about at the very prologue of my book. I'm 22 years old. I just turned 22, and I had this massive LSD trip that was very, very powerful, and I experienced an ego death where I basically dissolved into the one and ceased to exist. I mean, the thing we're most attached to is our ego. Our ego first, our body second. And once you see you're not those things, you can change your mind about anything and everything after that, because that's the thing we're most attached to. We're attached to this belief that we are this separate being, the separate ego, and that we have this body and we protect the body and we protect the ego from being hurt. That's not who we are, though. So we're something far deeper than that. So that creates massive flexibility in almost every way in your life.
So the LSD trip, it's great. So the new book is called The Whole Story. Brand new business. People should check out love.life. There's some really interesting stuff there about integrative medicine and how we think about the world. I can't thank you enough for this time. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.